Hi there, English 10 friends. This is Dr. Simon here, and I have my cat, Callie, with me. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the Renaissance period and hopefully establish some background for understanding how and why Sir Thomas More came about the ideas that he put into his political treatise, Utopia. So the Renaissance is the first of 5 literary movements that we're going to be talking about this year. And when we talk about the Renaissance, we're really talking about the English Renaissance because this is a course in English and British literature. And these are the years that we're talking about. As we progress through the year, we'll also be talking about the Age of Reason in the 18th century, Romanticism, Victorianism, and Modernism. But today we will talk about the Renaissance. So the Renaissance began in Italy in the late 1300s, and over the course of about a century, the ideas of the Renaissance migrated outward and in a northerly fashion. And by the time we get to the end of the 15th century, the Renaissance had very much taken hold in England. So what was the Renaissance? The Renaissance was a period of scholarship, a period of great advances in art, literature, religion, philosophy, science, invention, and in geography. And those advances really very much stemmed from a fascination with classical learning and philosophy. The Renaissance thinkers were very much taken by the idea that a great civilization had flourished in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And here I have a photograph of the Parthenon here in Athens. And the Renaissance scholars believed that conscientious study and imitation of the ancient civilization offered the key to new greatness. They believed that the study of literature and art of the ancient would help them acquire 6 things. They believed they would become wiser, have more refined taste, have a better understanding of what authority and good authority is. It would help them understand nature with a capital N, and it would help them understand more about human beings, particularly the dignity of humans and an understanding of the vastness of human potential. Renaissance artists also very much put emphasis on physical beauty, order, reason, and symmetry. And if you think about the society of the utopians, the idea of physical beauty, order, and reason are very, very much at the fore. So again, the Renaissance began in Italy in the late 1300s, but we're really going to focus in on the Renaissance as it occurred in England. So just to give you a little bit of a political context, the English Renaissance spanned 6 monarchs, the Tudor monarchs, and then James I. So we start with Henry VII, Henry VIII with all of his wives, a few more here. Elizabeth I, very, very important person in the history of the English Renaissance. And then finally ending with King James I. And Elizabeth and James, by the way, were the 2 monarchs who spanned Shakespeare's life. And we will be moving into Shakespeare in a few short weeks. Okay, so what were some of the catalysts for the English Renaissance? Just also important in terms of having some context for how this thinking came about. So a few things that were happening starting in the 13th century that gave way to the great flourishing of thinking that really girded the Renaissance. First of all, 13th century, the Crusades. So Crusades were really, really important because it led to the exposure of many European scholars of European ideas. Okay, so ideas started to flow into Europe and into or onto the island of England. The Crusades also facilitated the growth of trade and commerce. That brought money into England, and with money, things like painting and art and literature could begin to flourish. Number two, gunpowder. Gunpowder, as you probably know, was an innovation of the Chinese starting in about the 13th century, makes its way over to Europe and becomes a really, really important innovation. Gunpowder was important because it changed warfare. Previous to guns, war was fought largely by longbows and by hand-to-hand combat. With gunpowder, wars became much more deadly. And when wars became more deadly, countries and states thought a little bit more about when and why they should go to war. This new mindset created a whole new landscape among diplomatic relations in Europe. And for the most part, the English Renaissance was a very largely peaceful period of time. Another catalyst for the English Renaissance was the Black Death. So Black Death, we're talking about the 14th century here. Black Death, the plague, decimated the population of Europe in the 14th century. The people who survived actually ended up doing very well. So the people who survived found themselves with new wealth. And after or in the wake of the Black Death, there was an ability for the survivors to climb up socially. So this upward momentum, this upward economic momentum led to a change in political structures in England, but it also led to a decline in feudalism. And some of you who had Miss Rajan in the seventh grade, probably remember that feudalism was one of the hallmark of the Middle Ages. 4, migration of Greek scholars and texts from Constantinople to Europe after the conquest of the Ottoman Turks. Again, 1453 brought new ideas into Europe and into England. And then finally, the printing press. Huge innovation. So the printing press was invented by a German man named Johannes Gutenberg, right around the middle of the 1440s. Very, very important invention in the history of Western civilization because it allowed for the printing of books and the spread of knowledge to a wide range of populations. It led to the printings of Bibles. The Gutenberg Bible. It led to the printing of Bibles in English rather than just being copied by hand in Latin. And this rapid spread of knowledge catalyzed literacy. So by the time we get to about 1530, half of the English population was literate, and that was so significant. So there were some results of this great flourishing of art and literature and philosophy. And I want to talk a little bit about these 3 results because these 3 results of the English Renaissance really impacted Sir Thomas More in his thinking. So I'm going to talk about humanism, the Reformation, and innovations in ship design. So first of all, humanism. Humanism was a very, very important sort of intellectual and philosophical movement that coincided with the Renaissance, particularly the Renaissance in northern countries. So basically we'll get 14th, 15th century and into the early 16th century, we begin to see an appearance of a certain type of scholar at Oxford University in England. And these scholars were people who had studied in Italy, studied Latin and Greek in Italy, and they brought back the classical ideals to England and to Northern Europe. They very much adopted the ancients' attitude toward man on earth. And they believed that many of them were secular thinkers as opposed to what had been the predominant type of thinkers of the time, religious thinkers. Many of them were secular thinkers, and they believed in the dignity of man. They believed in the power of reason. They believed that man was the center of his own universe. They believed that people should embrace human achievements in education, classical arts, literature, and scientists. You see that the people of Utopia were largely humanists. Sir Thomas More was most definitely a humanist, but he was a little bit of a quirky humanist because he was not solely a secular thinker. In fact, he was a very, very devout Catholic, something that would ultimately contribute to his demise. The second result of the Renaissance is something I bet you can recall from your time in modern world history, those of you who were here last year. So the Reformation began in 1517, and it was sparked by this man, Martin Luther, who was a German man. He very much was disappointed with what was happening in the Catholic Church, right? Up until 1517, the Catholic Church was the main religion of Western Europe. But Martin Luther saw some things that were going on in the Catholic Church that he did not like. For example, he saw that the Pope was arbitrarily and abusively exercising his authority. He saw a great deal of greed among clergy. He saw that clergymen were selling confessions, selling pardons, and selling church offices. And he also didn't like the idea that there was this trafficking in holy relics. So people could take a little lock of hair and put it maybe like in a little box and sell it and say, this is the hair of Christ, and really profit tremendously off of this fraudulent trade. So he thought a whole lot of other things were wrong, and he came up with a list of grievances and a list of reasons why people needed to split from the papal seat in Rome. And he actually put these together in what is known today as the 95 Theses, and he literally wrote these down, nailed them to a door at a small church in Wittenberg, which is a small city in Germany. And that really began the Protestant Reformation. And it led to a splitting off of Christianity that is, we still see in our existence today. So I want to kind of give you a little bit of visual about Christianity and this split between Catholicism and Protestantism, because this tension between the Catholics and the Protestants are going to impact our study of English and British literature all the way into the 20th century. So a little timeline here, 0 AD, birth of Christ, and that gives rise to a church which becomes the Catholic Church, right? Okay, but 1517, Martin Luther, as we just discussed, posted his grievances, posted his 95 theses or arguments on the door of the church in Wittenberg, and that began a splintering of the church into Protestantism. And you can see all of the other blue little splinters. It continued to splinter into lots of other denominations. But for our purposes, it's super important to remember that the Catholics and the Protestants are going to fight, sometimes very violently, throughout the next few hundred years. Catholics, and this is a simplification, major tenet of Catholicism is salvation through deeds, and the Pope is infallible. The major tenet of Protestantism is salvation through faith, and these were people who did not place any sort of credence in the authority of the Pope. So we've talked about humanism, we've talked about the Reformation, and the third result of the Renaissance is this wonderful set of innovations that came about in navigational instruments and in ship design. These these innovations led to the Age of Discovery, and the Age of Discovery sparked the beginning of colonization, right? Because during the Renaissance, we have Sir Francis Drake sailed around the world, proved for once and for all that the earth is not flat, and from that point began this idea that England could conquer the world. And by the time we get to the 19th century, England will have conquered a great bit of the world. Okay, so those are the three results of the Renaissance. And one more page here. That brings us to Sir Thomas More. All of this lays out context in history, social history, for how and why he writes this very, very famous political treatise, Utopia, and why and how he gets the idea for the sea captain, discoverer, adventurer, explorer, Hythloday, who goes and finds this imaginary utopian island, Utopia. Our next Loom will be a little bit more about Sir Thomas More and his life and his times. Thanks so much for joining me, and we'll have more later. Bye-bye.